All right, greetings everybody. Welcome to my channel. Hope this video finds you well. We are doing a shower renovation project in which we are installing a fiberglass shower pan like this one. This is one video of many that I show you basically from start to finish how I did this. So you can search under my channel for the previous videos. The last video, we actually built out the wall. The shower glass, the fiberglass shower pan is installed. We built out the walls a little bit. We also adjusted the shower valve and got that braced up, firmed up really nicely, so you can, again, check that out. And we also put up the cement backer board. This is 1/2-inch Hardiebacker is what I am working with, and we secured that firmly to the walls. It drops down over the shower pan really nicely, and we sealed up the seams with fiberglass tape and thin set. So in this video, I'm going to show you the next step here. We are waterproofing using this awesome stuff called Redgard. It's a liquid waterproofing membrane. I'll pop a link down below. It's really cool stuff. We'll get there though, don't worry. First, we need to prep the area and also do a little test. So what I'm doing here, a little sander, you can see, just kind of getting any rough spots from the screws and also those seams, any kind of jagged, thin set left over. You want to make sure that's nice and smooth. We're going to also clean that off, but first let me pause, and we're actually going to test something out. The instructions for Redgard ambiguously call for priming first before you put down your full coat. So I'm going to draw up a little test, and I did another video where I go into a little bit more detail, but basically 4 parts water, 1 part Redgard. Mix it up really well so it looks like strawberry milk, and you kind of paint it on. Well, this is the idea, right? I was curious to know if it had any effect on the bond of subsequent coats of Redgard and ultimately the tile. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. In one box, I'm priming. The box to the right, the box to the left is going to be unprimed. And then I'll go ahead and put on some coats one by one, and we're going to build it up to about 7 coats and see how many mils we are. Because that was something else I was going to test. How thick, how long does it take, how many coats do I need? The instructions call for about 25 mils, which is about the size of a credit card. Now this little tool here is a wet mill gauge. I'll pop a link down below. Very critical. While it's wet, you want to pop it in there to make sure you are not going too thick or too thin. So you can see here we're about 6 coats. This is just brush stroked on very, very thinly. I'll show you how many mils this is in just a second, but along the way I'm just kind of testing to see, is it waterproofing? Am I thick enough or not? And you can see the water just on the cement backer board is not, it's not waterproof stuff. It's water resistant, but it still absorbs water and will bring that water through to your stud. So we definitely need to put down some Redgard. The Redgard's not quite thick enough, so I'm just building that up again. Now after about 7 coats, you can see there, blue magic marker 7, I'm going to cut a little triangle or a little rectangle and peel that back. And just to give you a sense of 7 very, very thin brush strokes and how thick that is. Not very thick, right? We need to go about the size of a credit card. Of course, credit card thicknesses vary, but generally speaking, 2 pieces of printer paper or computer paper, they're about 4 to 5 mils each. So we're at about 10 mils. So you can see we definitely need to go a little thicker in the testing process. And I encourage you to test this out too before you, again, just start throwing this stuff on if you've never worked with it before. It can be surprisingly thin or surprisingly thick. And you definitely don't want to get it too thick. It can actually crack and fail on you. But you don't want it too thin either, right? Because then it won't waterproof as per the specs of the manufacturer. So you can get your trowel out. The instructions do say you should apply it with a trowel. You got to be really careful though. If you do hold it at a 45-degree angle, you're going to very easily exceed I think the thickness, which is about 125 mils. That says do not exceed 125. That's kind of the magic number, but you don't need to get close to that thick, I don't think, for waterproofing. Again, right there is about 25 mils. So I know I can go, as I build my confidence here, I know I can go a little thicker. I can actually put it you can put it on with whatever you want, really. The thinner your application device, the more ridges you'll have, so keep that in mind. You'll have to knock those down while it's still wet. But generally, this is kind of how I approached the testing process. Remember, I had about 10 mils before, plus whatever I just put on there, right? So this little gauge does not test dry mils. They have to be wet so it can actually penetrate down through there. So I'm looking at about 15 mils plus the 10 that was already dry. So keep that in mind as you not only test, but when it comes to actually apply it to your specific setting, right? Add any dry coats or layers that you had put on to any subsequent layers. Add those two numbers up and you should get to your minimum number. Now, you might be looking to be thicker or thinner depending on your application and your context and your setup, right? For example, if you're doing a shower floor, you might need to go a lot thicker. These were just for shower walls. I'm not doing a shower floor or a drain or anything like that. And as part of the testing process, I'm actually going to adhere some sample tiles using some thin set. I really like this thin set. We'll be tiling in another video, so be sure to look for that or subscribe, and you should be notified once that is ready and out. But I use VersaBond, the white stuff. It's super professional. It's got a really good bond. Of course, I'll pop links down below for everything. So in the testing stage still, we're going to get this set up, let it dry for a few days, and I'm just going to make sure we're A, at the right thickness, and B, I'm curious to know if I had to prime or not. Was there any short-term effect? Realizing that this is a short-term, very unscientific test, right? But if things like popped off, in a day, or if there was a noticeable difference between the curing time of the thin set, or if things started flaking or whatnot. And I'm even taking the hammer to it as part of my test to see if anything was going on. And I really couldn't tell anything. The conclusion was, you'll see one pop off before the other, but that's where the thin set meets the tile. That's not necessarily a priming issue. So it was kind of a tie, but I'm a conservative guy, so I'm going to go ahead and prime it nonetheless. Because I'm dealing with Hardiebacker, apparently there's a lot of opinion out there saying this is really thirsty cement backerboard, and the priming basically helps absorb that water first and sucks that the diluted Redgard into the cement backerboard. Now, if you're dealing with other backerboard, it's my understanding you might not have to prime first. So you should definitely Google that. The question, should I prime with my, Durarock or whatever brand you happen to be working with? But I ultimately decided to prime, and here I am. Again, it's 1 part Redgard and then 4 parts water. And I think I made too much here, but I started with, I think, about 1/3 or 1/2 a cup of Redgard, and then again 4 equal parts water. And you want to stir that up really well, make it look kind of like strawberry milk, as I alluded to earlier. Get all those chunks out, and it will chunk up at the bottom on you, so you can stir for a while. And we're probably a little water heavy here, but anyway, I know what's in there. It's going on pink, that's for sure. So here I am applying the priming coat to my cement backerboard. Now, it's pretty watery stuff, so definitely put a towel down below. And obviously, after we sanded earlier, I forgot to mention, definitely clean this stuff off with a sponge, kind of like you're wiping grout, couple of passes, and then wring out. You want this stuff your walls to be completely clean before you apply the prime coat, because you want a good bond, right? It's got to be really, really clean. So we're a little irregular here, but overall it looks like mission accomplished. Now the next step is to take some fiberglass. It's about 6-inch wide tape. This is different from your fiberglass tape that you use to seal your seams for the cement backerboard. This stuff is another waterproofing membrane that you're going to put over pretty much all the seams. At least that's what my approach was. And I started with the shower niche, the corners, the shelf here. This is how I did a little trick that I picked up somewhere on YouTube. Little squares here, and you basically cut half of it. So they're like 2-inch squares, 1.5-inch squares. You cut kind of half of it and fold it like that, and that's going to give you a nice back corner. So you do 2 of those, give you a different view here in a second. And then you'll basically put these little strips. Theirs are about a couple of inches tall and a couple of inches like L shape, right? Just like that. And I'm just pre-cutting and dry fitting everything. Look at that. Make sure everything looks good before we Redgard this stuff in. And that's going to be the next step. We're going to coat under and over this stuff, and that is going to create a watertight seal all the way around. If you don't use this fabric, you can run the risk over time your seal's opening up. Yes, Redgard is waterproof, but your big gaps, Redgard might fail, and you want to have a backup in that case. So you can see the shower niche, the sides, the bottom, the top is one piece, and I just kind of fold it over like that. So I don't have to really cut anything besides cutting it down to the appropriate length. And that's why I like this fiberglass tape. So this is what it looks like. It does kind of static electricity stick. So that's what's holding it up, which is lovely. You can make sure everything fits really well. I did label everything because I'm going to take it down, and we'll return to that in the next step here. But what I'm going to do next is apply a very thin coat of pure straight up Redgard on top of that primer coat. I'm not doing the tape quite yet. I wanted to get a base coat of Redgard on first. That's just my own personal preference. You could certainly choose, I think, to put on your fiberglass tape, your waterproofing membrane tape at this step as well. But I wanted to put on a full thin coat. It's about 1 mil. From my test, I knew that one coat is a little bit more than 1 mil. And so it definitely, I just brushed it on. The whole thing was applied by a brush, so I could really control making sure it wasn't, too thick at all. I just felt more comfortable having kind of a 1 mil, 1.3 mil base on there on top of the primer before I saturated and embedded my fiberglass tape. All right, so let me move along here. This is, again, the first coat. Very thinly applied. Now this stuff does go on hot pink or boldly pink, I would say. And one thin coat will dry very, very quickly. And you know it's dry when it turns red like this. Pretty cool stuff. So now that I have my first coat on, you can see here I've got my thin set and my regular fiberglass tape that I had put on in the prior video. So I feel pretty good about that. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply my fiberglass waterproof tape membrane. So to do that, we are getting a pretty liberal amount of Redgard. You can just obviously look at the video here to see kind of how much I am dealing with. And we're going to make sure we have a solid wet coat. You don't want it to get too clumpy. Again, we don't want to exceed the thickness. We don't want to build it out too far, and we want to make sure it's all even. And once we have a nice wet coat underneath, we'll go ahead and put the tape on. And again, you can see why we labeled it so we can match it back up in the correct place because we had set those aside. And you've got plenty of time, I would say, to work with. We have a thin coat. It will start to dry, within 5 minutes or so. So plenty of time, but you don't want to take your time, if that makes sense. We'll go ahead and apply that. Make sure that the fabric is laid out nicely and it's not folded or creased or anything, especially if you're brushing it in like this. The bristles of the brush sometimes can pull out some of the fabric or push it, so you want to pay attention during this part. Make sure everything is uniform and embedded nicely. And we'll just put a nice coat on top of it, and that should dry and hold it really, really well. And we'll just continue moving up the way here. We'll do the corner. So notice I did started with the bottom shelf, and then I'm going to move on to those little 1.5, maybe 2-inch square pieces that I mentioned earlier. And I'm just going to fold those, and you can kind of hold them with one hand and then slide it in there, drop it into the wet stuff, And then again, make sure it's not folded over in a way that it's not supposed to be, right? Should kind of look like that. There's the other side, another look at it. And you kind of poke it down in there. Now that cut with the scissors I had made in that little piece, I'm not worried about that. The Redgard will fill that in nicely and create a nice watertight seal. Here's my next little strip going up the side. So we'll get that down. Now you should see the Redgard, the pink, start to kind of saturate through a little bit the underside. That's a good sign. If it doesn't, you might be too dry, and that of course runs the risk of it not adhering on the underside, which is a big problem. So you definitely want to make sure you've got a nice wet coat underneath and it's very uniform. That will be an important part of this process. And you can kind of see how much I'm dealing with. So again, liberal, but don't overdo it. Especially in the corners, you might feel the need to bulk up the corners, but nice and uniform. I think that's going to turn out nicely. All right, we will speed this up for you a little bit so you can respect your time here. We could spend all day watching this, right? But I think you get the point. Here is the side. Remember, we were using one continuous piece, and make sure it folds over by about 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch in the back, and it has to cover that seam up in the front as well. And we'll paint that in. We'll finish up that side and do the other side as well. Notice I do like to start with that, generally with that outer edge, and you can kind of use it as a glue, right? Did you see that? I kind of pressed on it, and that allows you a little tension. You can pull on it a little bit to kind of make sure it wraps around the back, that first corner and the back corner nicely. All right, we'll get that painted in, and then we'll do the top as well. So overall, not too bad, right? The shower niche, the corners. Follow this process. You should have a really solid, tight, watertight seal pretty much in all corners. All right, and we're going to move on to the long seams, the vertical and the horizontal. Following that same process, a nice liberal amount underneath, and then a nice uniform amount on top as well, and we'll brush that on. You want it to be a little slippery. You want it to kind of slide. If there's too much, you can see it's getting a little dry there, but just keep working it, keep it going, and it should dry nicely. Same thing with the horizontals now. I'm not sure if you have to tuck those side pieces in. I'm not sure if there's a best practice there. I just kind of overlapped it on top. But anyway, that's what it looks like when it's all painted on, so to speak. And this is kind of how much I've used so far. Not even half of the bucket. And I did buy 2 buckets. And you can see there it's obviously wet. Pink means wet, red means dry. Now up until this point, we've just been using a manual hand brush. Now you could use a foam roller like this. This is foam roller I really like. It's properly sized. You can fit it in the bucket. You don't have to use you don't have to pour this stuff into another, paint container. So that's nice. It goes on a little thin, but you can overcompensate. You can kind of bulk it up, if you will, just make it a little bit, obviously put more Redgard on, and you can experiment with this a little bit. I do like this. It goes on a lot faster than using a brush, but don't expect it to get a lot thicker necessarily. When you roll it, it's going to press it all down, right? And it gets, per coat, I would say maybe 2 mils as opposed to 1, but maybe not even that, right? So make sure you practice a little bit, use a trowel, and you can kind of use a technique, something like this, to actually build up a membrane as opposed to a coat. Does that make sense? And use your wet mill gauge to check that. So kind of depends on your comfort level. Here's a trowel application. Kind of goop it on, and you can use the long side or the shorter side there. Obviously, you don't want to use the notched side. You're not creating ridges. You want to create it nice and smooth. This is definitely a technique game. I would say I got the hang of it. Felt okay with it, but not great, despite the practice that I gave myself. But if you're interested, this is what it looks like. Any pros watching this video are probably going to laugh at me. But that is all good. I am cool with being vulnerable. Anyway, I used all three techniques or approaches in applying Redgard. I did the brush, I did the roller, and I did the trowel. I felt most comfortably with the brush and the roller, and then the trowel was definitely my least preferred option, but it got me to my minimum coats a lot faster. That is for sure. Notice the ridges here. I have to go back and kind of knock those down in a delicate way, right? If you put too much pressure on your trowel, you're going to create an imperfection. It'll be thicker in one spot versus the other. So that was kind of the game that you end up playing with a trowel application. But with that undercoat being X mils plus this overcoat that I am putting on right now, reading X mils, the sum should be 25 or more to get that general waterproofing dry mill requirement put forth in the instructions by Redgard, and that is what I did. One final shot of and little tip here for you: if you use a brush to apply it, obviously if you keep dragging it, it's going to get down to one thin coat, about 1 mil per coat. That'll take you forever. So I like to go back, put one coat on, and then while it's still wet, grab another coat, and you should have it should be nice and slippery. Nice and slippery. If it's not slippery, it's going to get too thin. That's an indicator that you could still be too thin. And that is a faster way to kind of beef up the mills a little faster if you want more control, if you don't prefer the trowel and you prefer a brush application. So anyway, that's how I waterproofed my shower. And don't forget, in the next video, we are going to be tiling, the moment I am most excited for. So be sure to check that out or subscribe if you want to be notified of that. Thanks for being with me today, and have a great one.